Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. John Kelly Profiler here, and welcome. Welcome to the beginning of the end series for the Golden State Killer. And I have to add this disclaimer that everybody's innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. However, today we're focusing on the fantasy. And I'm very passionate about the fantasy because this is where we get an opportunity. If people and clinicians are on their toes to intervene early on in a possible violent sexual offender's childhood, to intervene on them and get them help, to catch them before they get into the fantasy or too far into the fantasy. See, the fantasy is like a built-in self-defense mechanism for this type of person. A person who, for whatever reason, really has no use for themselves or doesn't like themselves and feels inferior. It's kind of like an egomaniac with an inferiority complex, something like that. But anyway, what they have to do is they have to medicate this low-grade depression. What I feel is a low-grade depression, kind of like a dysthymia, depressive mood disorder, or coupled with something that's called anhedonia, the inability to really enjoy and experience feelings and pleasurable things, the inability to really enjoy like a baseball game or going fishing. I believe with serial killers, especially early on, you have this underlying low-grade depression that has to be medicated and is medicated through their antidepressant, built-in antidepressant system, which is the fantasy. Because as long as they can stay in the fantasy, they can get out of reality in their mind. They don't have to focus on the hellish, abusive life that they might be having, or whatever they feel is so negative and so inferior about them. By moving off to that safe, enjoyable place in their mind called the fantasy, they can keep themselves out of their dark reality. Unfortunately, the fantasy grows, and it starts maybe around 10, 11 years old. It's what I've been told by a couple serial killers. And that fantasy just continues to build up a tolerance. And at first, it might be breaking and entry, might be shoplifting, but always there's some kind of power and control in the fantasy where they feel that they're dominant over others. And it can be that they're dominant over a younger girl, and that progresses on to where they're more dominant over an adult, depending on what the fantasy is. Every one is different. Every serial killer pretty much has a different fantasy and has a different victim type. They have a focus on certain physical characteristics of certain types of victims. And this is what they're engaged in hundreds, if not thousands of times through the course of a day. They always retreat into the fantasy. And as I said, the fantasy constantly builds up tolerance and gains a tolerance, a higher tolerance. So they have to continue to up the fantasy until the fantasy itself isn't enough. I mean, they still have the fantasy, but now they have to try and make it reality. And at that point in time, they're out running. And that's where the hunting, the stalking, the domination, and the killing comes in. Because when they're involved in this kind of exciting, stimulating behavior, they are more or less medicating this deep, dark depression or hole inside of them. They're out there moving, they're getting all this stimulation, and it's actually soothing to them. And it's exciting for them to feel like they're godlike, that they have the last uh, the last say in who lives and who dies after they've had complete control over another human being. So it's very important to understand that the fantasy is always going on and it's always growing and building momentum and progressing. The most important thing, and what we try to educate people on, is trying to intervene on an abused child that's showing various risk factors and warning signs of becoming uh, a serial predator, a violent sexual offender. As we go on, and from talking to various serial killers and interviewing them, I will say in captivity, because when you're interviewing a serial killer in prison, it's pretty much over for them. If they're not going on the gurney, and if they are going on the gurney, they probably won't talk to you because they're still filing appeals. But if they're not going on the gurney and they're serving life in captivity, in prison, in a cage where they deserve to be, you can really catch them in their normal state. There's no reason for them to be really charming because they know they're not going anywhere, they're not getting out. So they're pretty much, at ease in the structure of the prison, and they're pretty much not trying to manipulate you because they know it's game over and they know they're stuck there. Now, at that point in time, you really get to see the true serial killer in his own natural state. And what I mean by this is his natural state is a very flat affective state. I mean, they have a very flat affect. You can actually wonder if there's even anybody alive inside that body. And a lot of them will talk about needing the stimulation from the excitement of the hunt, stalk, domination, and eventually kill of a victim. This stimulation actually creates a high in them. They're running on adrenaline, and they really, really feel godlike at this point in time. And as long as they're running on that type of stimulation, they're not digressing back into that depressive kind of state. So it's important for them to continue to enjoy the fantasy and to act out on the fantasy and to continually enjoy this type of stimulation and excitement, because the bottom line is that these people are actually, living to kill and killing to live, if you think about it, because they will tell you, without this excitement, without this stimulation, they're actually so much focused on the negative and so flat into, I would say, a depressive kind of state that they're actually need this stimulation to feel alive. So the bottom line is they're actually killing to feel alive. As crazy it may sound, they're actually killing and needing the stimulation of the stalk, the hunting, the domination, usually of a woman, and the kill for them to continue to feel alive. Otherwise, they're feeling dead inside. So that's what I have to say today on the fantasy. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please continue to subscribe. We can't thank you enough, and we're so honored with all your subscriptions. And if you want to follow us on Facebook, please check us out as well. Many thanks, and we'll be back to you with our thoughts next week. Thank you so much again. Have a wonderful day and be safe out there.